Federal agencies have been removing college degree requirements in favor of skills and experience for a variety of jobs. Turns out state government is way ahead. That's according to researchers at Brookings. Two of those researchers, Justin Heck and Blair Corcoran de Castillo, discussed the findings with Tom Temin.
We're with an organization called Opportunity at Work, and we're focused on understanding workers who are skilled through alternative routes, or STARS. These workers have developed skills in lots of places, whether that's community college or military experience, and most commonly on-the-job experience. STARS make up half of the labor market, and so often they have been overlooked as employers have prioritized skills developed in very specific places like four-year institutions. And so our organization and our research is focused on helping employers, policymakers, and particularly state federal governments recognize the skills that that STARS bring to the labor market.
Sure. And I guess the college degree requirement must have grown up over the decades simply because of the risk-averse nature of governmental institutions. Is that fair to say, Blair?
I would say so. I think there's probably a mix of reasons. The professionalization of public service roles, civil service requirements, but also just the introduction of online, job applications, and just the fact that folks get inundated now with applications. And so what we found is that this wasn't like by grand design. It was kind of as a result of myriad of things. And so it's resulted in where we are today, to have less opportunity than 30 years ago.
There's a little bit of irony in this because for decades as well, people have been complaining about the KSA essays that were in federal applications, skills, knowledge, abilities, if I got that in the right order. Skills, knowledge, and abilities is what we're talking about ultimately.
It absolutely is. I think sometimes, though, in building out those KSAs, folks have focused on proxies as opposed to skills themselves. And so what we're trying to do is support federal, state, and local governments in getting clear on what the skills are that are needed, regardless of where folks have built them, and what are ways to assess for those skills during the hiring process.
All right. So you have written that there is some activity in this whole STARS area at the state level. Tell us some of the highlights you've seen there.
So we've seen over 21 states make a commitment to removing degree requirements. We've kind of seen this in a couple of different ways. One chunk of those executive orders and legislation have been focused on immediately removing degree requirements. So Maryland removed 50% of degree requirements, Pennsylvania, 90%. Another chunk of those have focused on doing reviews. So a lot of states already have requirements where you can't discriminate based on, or you can't assess solely on education, but that has become prioritized. So they've required reports to see where degrees are required versus not, so they can review their minimum qualifications. And finally, places like Colorado have done executive orders to transition their entire hiring system for the state to one that's based on skills solely. And so that's what we're seeing writ large, and it's an exciting time. Because we've also got 25 states, I think 24 states in one territory that are a part of a National Governors Association Skills in the States Community of Practice, where they're working together to try to figure out how to take these actions, these policy actions, implement them to create real change in their communities.
Are there particular areas where this is effective, this idea of the STARS abilities that come in through work and experience? Because, say, in civil engineering, you probably need a degreed program to be able to evaluate bids for a bridge. Is that girder big enough? And, that could be a disaster. Whereas in something like cybersecurity, people can acquire that skill with some certifications and some courses in a couple of years and be pretty good at it.
That's exactly right, Tom. I think one of the things that we really try to emphasize, college is a fantastic way of developing skills and for workers to experience mobility. It just can't be the only way, right? And so there are roles that we're seeing a lot of opportunity and progress in, specifically in regard to administrative roles, some financial roles, HR positions, and to your point, a lot of IT and software related roles. We've found that the private sector in particular is really thoughtful about skills when it comes to software development, right? There's this sense that if you have the skills to do the work, do the work. And we found that state governments lagged a little bit behind in terms of recognizing and accepting those skills. And we've seen really exciting progress, specifically in the last 12 months, to see degree requirements coming off of jobs and opportunities opening up.
We're speaking with Justin Heck. He's Research Director, and Blair Corcoran de Castillo, a Senior Director at the nonprofit Opportunity at Work in their STARS project. Yeah, so a lot of it does seem to center around information technology. I mean, I just have interviewed some of the Service to America medalists, finalists for this year, and more than one of them has had an expertise that they got collegiately. One, for example, was a doctorate in mining engineering, but in so doing the work, they also developed software programs, but they weren't professional programmers, yet that software has been promulgated and used widely throughout various industries. So there's almost a hybrid approach is always going to be needed, isn't it? Blair?
Absolutely. What we've seen is that the places where folks build a lot of their skills is on the job. So as much as training programs are absolutely needed, I think that more and more public and private sector entities are recognizing the skills that are built on the job and are thinking about other ways to support folks in building the skills that they need for their jobs once they're in those positions.
And is there anything federal agencies might be able to learn from state agencies or state organizations in terms of how you set up a, I guess you'd say, programmatic approach to changing your job standards, because you always have to have that accountability and oversight function for any change that profound?
I think there are a lot of places where they could learn from each other. States are taking approaches that make sense based on their economies and demand, what they have high need, high vacancies. The federal government's doing the same. So they have similar challenges, but they also have different ones. And so what we're seeing is that there are different, given to scope and scale, there are different approaches being taken. So one place where states could learn from the federal government is related to more shared certifications or shared hiring pools, because one of the biggest challenges we hear in states is that it's great, they're moving to skills, but they're getting inundated with applications. The federal government has already been implementing practices to show how they could do that. On the flip side, I will say that states are being really creative in thinking about assessments really broadly and what that means for the civil service. And so I think that's a place where the federal government might be able to learn from states.
And what are some of the best practices for being able to reassure the agency, oneself, that the skills that the people describe really are possessed by those people? Because if someone has a law degree, say from Yale, but you can pretty much presume that they know something about the law. If they're self-taught as a programmer, how do you know they can really program in the language you want or something like that?
That's what's exciting. I think a lot of public sector entities are trying multi-hurdle hiring processes or advancement processes by looking at their own folks. And so they're looking at both how people are performing within their job. So looking at the probationary period and using that as part of the hiring process as the last part to see how does this person actually work in the job. But before that, they're doing behavioral, role play, et cetera, to try to get a sense for what this means in practice. Because I think what Justin and I have realized is that interviewing is a skill, and some of us are really good at it. Some of us are not, but some of us are really good at a job, and there are other ways for folks to assess that. So that's what we're seeing. They're trying to do more work-based role play and assessments that actually are more like what the job will be to better understand whether they'll be successful in the role.
And that sounds like good practice for whatever the source of qualification is, even a degree.
Absolutely. I think Justin and I would argue that if you're going to be moving to skills-based hiring, it should be regardless of how people built their skills. This is for non-degree and degree candidates.
The reality is this didn't get invented yesterday at the federal or state level, though, did it?
That's exactly right. I think for a long time, employers, government employers, private sector employers have cared about skills, right? They want to be able to identify them and activate them. And the reality is that a vast number of stars are already successfully working in state governments and the federal government today. And often we find that employers say like, oh, of course, Kevin or Sue or Denisa, like they're great workers. We know that, of course, because we've seen them do the job. And we found that employers find that observing a star on the job, recognizing where they develop their skills is a really useful way of opening the door for other stars, right? Having that test example of, oh, of course, so-and-so can do the job. And there are millions more workers like this person that I know.
Justin Heck is Research Director, and Blair Corcoran de Castillo is a Senior Director at Brookings. We'll post this interview along with a link to their Skilled Through Alternatives routes findings at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. And you can hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.